Theology in 3 minutes. Topic: the ontological argument. The ontological argument doesn't start with any rationale right out of the gate. Instead, it takes a step back and asks for us to define what we're talking about first. Because we can't agree on whether something exists if we can't even agree on what we're discussing in the first place. The word comes from the Greek ontos for being, and logos for reasoning. We are reasoning what it means for God being. So what does it mean when you say God, and what does it mean to say you believe in God? This position is famously taken by contemporary author and clinical psychologist, Dr. Jordan Peterson. In his book, We Who Wrestle with God, he spends hundreds of pages circling around the same question. How does someone define belief, let alone belief in God? So what is God? Well, that depends on who you ask. Every culture and religion throughout history will give you a different answer. Unfortunately for polytheistic religions, the ontological argument can't help them, as the line between what is and isn't a God often blurs. The Eastern pantheistic religions have a much easier definition, that the ultimate God is existence itself, and if reality is real and God is reality, then God is real. The ontology of God to them is rather straightforward. For the monotheistic religions, however, they define God as a distinct entity apart from creation. He therefore requires his own ontology, his own definition. So what is God to an Abrahamic religion? Well, they have their own rather well-known books on the subject. But the earliest form of the ontological definition for God comes from Saint Anselm in the 11th century, when he defined God with the quote, "God is that than which nothing greater can be conceived." In this context, greater isn't just raw power, it also applies to benevolence, objectivity, morality, wisdom, purpose, and literally all other meaningful dimensions. This was then expanded upon by St. Thomas Aquinas, who combined Anselm's definition for God with Aristotelian philosophy of forms, and added another element to the discussion. To summarize, that which is real is superior to that which is mere concept. This seems rather straightforward. Eating real food is obviously superior than simply imagining food while starving to death. If you were to try and imagine the perfect anything, for example, the perfect pizza, clearly a real pizza is superior to an imaginary one. If you start with something that exists only in the mind, you can immediately conceive something greater. The same thing, but real. However, that also means that your so-called greatest imaginary pizza wasn't actually the greatest pizza, the real one is. There's a logical connection between these two definitions. If God's very definition is that of maximal superiority, then that applies to the parameter of being itself. Now that being said, God doesn't exist in the same way that you or I exist. He is not necessarily a material entity, so objections against the ontological arguments that use this line of reasoning are fundamentally missing the point. A perfect pizza is only a perfect pizza insofar as what makes a pizza. But God isn't just perfect in one dimension or another, he is the apex of all perfection for perfection's sake. On the other hand, the ontological argument isn't a mic drop proof either, it's an exercise in clarity. Define God as that than which nothing greater can be conceived. Recognize that reality outranks imagination, and the conclusion is, at the very least, far harder to shrug off.